In 2025, the world bought $3 trillion worth of oil. Almost all of it was paid in one currency, not because it was the strongest or the most stable, but because of a secret deal made in a Saudi desert in 1974. It's called the Petrodollar, the most powerful financial system most people were never taught. August 15, 1971. President Richard Nixon appears on television and announces, "I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold." Here's what that meant. Since the end of World War II, the U.S. dollar had been backed by gold under a system called Bretton Woods. Any country holding dollars could exchange them for gold from the United States. That system made the dollar the most trusted currency in the world. But over time, the United States had issued far more dollars than it had gold to support. Funding wars, domestic programs, and Cold War spending stretched the system. Foreign governments noticed and they started demanding gold in exchange for dollars. So Nixon closed the window. No more gold exchange. The dollar was no longer backed by gold. It was now backed by trust alone. And trust started to weaken. Then came another shock. In October 1973, Egypt and Syria launched an attack on Israel during the Yom Kippur War. The U.S. supported Israel with a major airlift. In response, Arab oil producers under OPEC reduced supply and imposed an embargo on the United States. Oil prices surged from around $3 per barrel to nearly $12. Fuel shortages hit hard. Lines at gas stations stretched for blocks. At that moment, the U.S. faced a serious problem. A currency without gold backing, rising inflation, and oil being used as economic pressure. A new system was needed. Enter Henry Kissinger, U.S. Secretary of State. He went to Saudi Arabia with a proposal. You have the world's largest oil reserves. That also makes you strategically vulnerable. So let's make a deal. Sell oil in U.S. dollars. Reinvest surplus earnings into U.S. Treasury bonds. In return, the United States provides security, military support, and protection of oil infrastructure. In 1974, Saudi Arabia agreed. Soon after, other major oil producers followed. And just like that, oil began to be priced in dollars globally. That created the petrodollar system. Now, if any country wanted oil, it first needed U.S. dollars. Japan needed dollars. Germany needed dollars. Every major economy needed dollars just to function in energy markets. That created constant global demand for the U.S. currency. But the system didn't stop there. Oil exporters accumulated massive dollar reserves. Countries like Saudi Arabia earned far more dollars than they could spend domestically, so those excess dollars had to go somewhere. And they went back into the United States through treasury bonds, banks, and financial markets. This flow became known as petrodollar recycling. In simple terms, oil money returned to America and funded its financial system. This cycle helped the U.S. in multiple ways. It supported government borrowing, kept demand for U.S. debt high, and helped maintain lower interest rates than would otherwise be possible. At the same time, it reinforced global dependence on the dollar because the system was circular. Oil required dollars. Dollars flowed back into U.S. assets. U.S. financial power supported the system that kept oil priced in dollars. By the 1980s, this structure was fully established. The dollar dominated global reserves. U.S. Treasury bonds became the primary safe asset for central banks, and global capital flowed through U.S. markets. Economists referred to this as exorbitant privilege, a polite term for a system where one country benefits disproportionately from global demand for its currency. But the system also created leverage, because the dollar became not just money, but infrastructure. Global trade, banking, reserves, and payments all relied on it. Being excluded from the dollar system meant being cut off from global finance. That's what made sanctions so powerful. It wasn't just about currency, it was about access. Over time, countries that challenged this system faced consequences. In 2000, Iraq announced oil sales in euros instead of dollars. A few years later, the country was invaded, and oil trade returned to dollars afterward. Libya proposed a gold-backed currency for African trade. Shortly after, the country faced military intervention and the project collapsed. Venezuela attempted to bypass the system using alternative settlement methods, under sanctions pressure. The initiative failed to gain real adoption, and sanctions intensified further. Each case had its own political context, but the pattern was consistent. Attempts to bypass the dollar system created major geopolitical friction. For decades, the system remained dominant. Then cracks started to appear. In 2022, after the Russia-Ukraine conflict escalated, Western nations froze a large portion of Russia's foreign reserves and removed key banks from the SWIFT system. This sent a signal globally. Dollar reserves were safe only as long as access remained allowed. After that, behavior began to shift. China reduced its holdings of U.S. treasuries from over $1 trillion to significantly lower levels and increased gold reserves. Russia and China expanded trade in local currencies. Brazil and China agreed to settle trade without using the dollar. India began paying for some imports in rupees, and Saudi Arabia signaled openness to accepting currencies beyond the dollar in certain transactions. Meanwhile, central banks increased gold purchases at record levels, adding over 1,000 tons in a single year. The dollar still dominates global trade and reserves by a wide margin. No alternative system has fully replaced it, but for the first time in decades, alternatives are beginning to form in parallel. Not one replacement, but many small shifts. And when systems built on dependence start to face alternatives, even slowly, the balance begins to change. So the real question isn't whether the petrodollar system disappeared overnight. It's whether the world is quietly building enough parallel paths to reduce its dominance over time. Because global systems don't usually collapse in one moment. They slowly lose exclusivity until one day they're no longer the only option. If you want more breakdowns like this, where finance, history, and power actually connect instead of staying in textbooks, stick around and subscribe.